The void is not silent. This is the first truth, and the greatest lie told to the masses of the Imperium. In the gulf between stars, where the Astronomican's light grows thin and desperate, there are echoes, whispers, sounds that have traveled for 10,000 years, diluted by distance, yet undiminished in their horror. Among the most persistent, the most carefully cataloged and ruthlessly suppressed by the Ordo Sinister, is a signal originating from a nameless sector of the Ultima Segmentum. It is not a warp signature. It is not the screech of Xenos or the chatter of forgotten human colonies. It is a scream. A single, sustained, and planet-wide scream, etched into the very fabric of reality. To hear it is a death sentence. To seek its source is heresy of the highest order. Yet, knowledge has a gravity all its own, and secrets, especially those as vast as this, create their own orbits. In the sealed observatory of the black ship Somber Penance, the thing that had once been Inquisitor Lysis of the Ordo Malleus stared at the runic display. Her augmetics were frozen, her biological eye wide, a single drop of blood tracing a path from her tear duct down her pallid cheek. The sound was not played through speakers. It was translated into a complex, agonized harmonic pattern on a psychic resonator. To her mind, however, it was a clear, crystalline shriek of absolute, eternal torment. It was the sound of a world dying not once, but every second for 10 millennia. She knew what it was. She had pieced it together from fragments of digital parchment in sealed archives, from the half-mad scrawlings of an excommunicated Magos, from a single, cryptic line in the personal log of a long-dead captain of the Legiones Astartes. She knew, and the knowledge was a cancer in her soul. This was not merely a dead world. This was Zaramund, the cradle, the first home, the place of genesis for the second Primarch. The official records stated nothing. There were empty pages, redacted slabs of plasteel, histories that ended with glorious departure for the Great Crusade and spoke no more. But Lysis had followed the silence, and silence has a shape. The shape led here, to this scream. The Primarch had been found, yes, reunited with his legion, the Star Scorpions. They had fought with a ferocity that was legendary, a cold, calculating wrath that chilled even the hearts of their brother legions. Then, after a campaign against a Xenos empire known only as the Silent Ones, the Primarch had returned to Zaramund, alone. The Legion was not summoned. No imperial edict was issued. The world simply vanished from all astrocartography, its route there wiped from navigational logs. A century later, during the fires of the heresy, the Star Scorpions were declared expungio totalis, purged with extreme prejudice, their names struck from all records, their battle honors reassigned. Not for treason, the Whispers said. Not for siding with Horus, but for something else, for asking a question, for seeking their father's home. Lysis's hands, one flesh, one polished adamantine, trembled as she input the final sequence. The Somber Penance was uniquely equipped. Its Geller field was interlaced with forbidden techno-arcana that could, in theory, mute a world's psychic echo. It was not a ship for battle, but for excision. She had convinced her superiors this scream was a nascent warp rift, a threat to be sealed. It was a partial truth, a shadow of the real one. Her true mission was to land, to set foot on Zaramund, to learn why a Primarch's homeworld had become a perpetual monument to agony. The ship shuddered as it tore its way from the Imperium, the scream on the resonator swelling into a deafening crescendo that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the marrow of her bones. The viewport resolved not into the black of space, but into a sickly, pulsating amber glow. There was no star in this system. The light came from the world itself. Zaramund hung against the void like a rotten fruit, weeping luminous, phosphorescent sap into the darkness. And it was screaming. The atmosphere of Zaramund was not air, but memory given toxic form. The Somber Penance's lander, a heavily warded and acoustically dampened probe designated Whisper, tore through veils of amber-hued mist that clawed at its hull with the consistency of congealed blood. Inside, Lysis sat strapped into her throne, Her teeth gritted so hard her jaw ached. The psychic dampeners in her cerebrum hummed at a painful frequency, struggling to translate the planetary scream into a mere physical vibration. It was failing. The sound was inside her now, a razor-edged worm burrowing through her thoughts, etching the single, unified note of suffering into the core of her being. Through the oculus, the landscape unfolded in a nightmare of contradiction. It was not a dead world. That would have been a mercy. It was a world in a state of perpetual, excruciating life.
Vast forests of crystalline structures, glowing with that same internal amber light, covered continents. They were not growing, they were shivering, each resonant tremor perfectly in time with the scream. Rivers of a viscous, silver fluid did not flow but pulsed, like sluggish arteries across a planetary corpse. There were no cities, no signs of the civilization that must have once thrived here to produce a being as magnificent as a Primarch. No ruins. It was as if every work of sentient hands had been carefully, utterly dissolved, leaving only this terrible, organic geological anguish. The whisper sat down on a plateau of black, glassy rock that echoed with a low chime at its touch. The landing strut sank slightly, as if the ground itself was malleable. Hungry, Lysis descended the ramp alone. Her inquisitorial rosette felt cold and insignificant against her chest. The air was thick, scentless, and heavy, pressing on her like a physical weight. Each exhalation felt like drowning in something other than oxygen. With every step, the scream gained texture. It was not one voice, but billions of voices fused into a single, seamless chord of despair. She could hear the high, desperate keen of children, the ragged gasps of the dying, the low moans of the hopelessly imprisoned, all woven together with the artistry of a master torturer. Her auspex was useless. It screened a riot of conflicting energy signatures and psychic feedback. She relied on her own augmented senses and the grim pull in her soul. She moved towards a rise, her boots leaving no imprint on the glassy ground. As she reached the crest, she saw the first structure. It was not a building, but a formation. A spire of the same amber crystal, 100 meters tall, rose from a valley below, and within it, perfectly preserved and illuminated by the internal glow, were humanoid figures, thousands of them, frowsing in poses of abject terror, hands clawing at the crystal that encased them, mouths wide and silent, endless screams that fed the world's own. This was not a monument, it was a museum of a moment, the moment of Sir Ammon's death. A wave of understanding, foul and chilling, washed over Lysis. This was not an external attack. This was not the work of Xenos or chaos bombardment. The destruction was total, cellular, and it had come from within. The psychic resonance was not the death cry of the planet, but its continued existence. It had been transformed, its entire biosphere and population converted into a single, sustained note of psychic torment. The scale was unimaginable. The power required to perform such an act was godlike. Only one agency in the Imperium possessed both the means and the will to enact such a punishment. The evidence pointed to a verdict more terrifying than any demonic incursion. This was an execution carried out by the Emperor himself. But what crime could possibly warrant an eternity of screamed atonement from an entire world? What did the second Primarch do, or learn, or become? That required not just his erasure, but the eternal damnation of his cradle. A sound, different from the omnipresent scream, echoed from behind a cluster of smaller crystal shards, a scrape of metal on stone. Lysis turned, her hand falling to the grip of her inferno pistol. She was not alone on the screaming world. The figure that emerged from the crystal copse was not human, nor was it, Lysis realized with a cold spike of dread, entirely unhuman. It stood in the crude shape of a man, perhaps 2.5 meters tall, but its form was a patchwork nightmare of rusted, corroded plasteel, fused ceramite fragments, and exposed, whirring mechanics that gleamed with a sickly oil slick sheen in the amber light. It had no head. In its place, a crude, cylindrical sensor array swiveled silently, a single blood-red lens focusing on her with a faint hydraulic whine. In one claw-like appendage, it held a weapon of unrecognizable make, its barrel a spiral bore that seemed to drink the light. A servitor, but like the world itself, it was wrong. Imperial servitors were mind-wiped, their functions singular and dull. This thing moved with a predatory, alien purpose. Its silence was more terrifying than the scream that enveloped them. A pocket of absolute void in the ocean of noise. The red lens regarded her, and Lysis felt a skin prickling across her skin, tasting her biosignature, her psychic imprint, her very soul. She did not fire. Raising her weapon against an unknown entity on this world felt like a blasphemy that might trigger something far worse. Instead, she slowly raised her left hand, the inquisitorial rosette catching the sour light. "I am Inquisitor Lysis, Ordo Malleus," she spoke, her voice swallowed by the atmosphere, emerging as a strained whisper. "By the authority of the Emperor's Holy Inquisition, identify yourself." The construct did not react to the rosette. The red lens dimmed for a moment, then brightened.
A sound issued from a grill on its torso, not a voice, but a burst of static that resolved, horrifyingly, into a perfect mimicry of the planetary screen, condensed into a microsecond of audio torture. Then it spoke. Its voice was a grating symphony of shattered glass and grinding gears, yet the words were clear, high Gothic, and dripped with an ancient, immeasurable bitterness. Authority. A joke carved on a tomb. You bear the sigil of the jailers. You walk the penitent fields. You hear the song of our crime. It took a step forward, its movements uncannily fluid. You seek the why, the question that damned the star scorpions, the question that unmade a son of the Emperor, the question that sings in every atom here. Lysis stood her ground, her mind reeling. You are of this world. You remember. We are Zeramund. What remains? The custodians of the truth, the self-inflicted wound. The construct gestured with its weapon. Arm, not at her, but at the towering crystal spire with its frozen populace. He asked the question, our beloved son, our luminous savior, returned from the stars with a lie unraveling in his heart. He asked the Emperor, "What are we, that you would use us so?" The words hung in the thick air, more dangerous than any virus bomb. It was not a question of tactics or loyalty. It was a question of fundamental purpose, the very question the Imperial truth was built to silence. The Imperial truth, Lysis began, but the construct emitted another burst of static, scream, a bandage over a festering truth. Our Primarch saw beyond it. In his campaign against the Silent Ones, he did not find mindless Xenos. He found archivists, keepers of histories older than mankind. They showed him the cycles, the rise and fall of galactic powers, each birthed by a force of order, each devoured by the warp it sought to deny. They showed him the Emperor's grand design not as a shining path, but as the next iteration of the cycle, a desperate, brutal gambit doomed to create the very chaos it sought to escape. The truth, Lysis realized, was not a weapon. It was a disease. The Primarch had been infected with a galactic truth, a fatal understanding of the Emperor's work as a tragic, self-defeating paradox. He had brought this cancer home. Our son was compassionate. He believed his father could be made to see, to change the design. The construct's voice dropped to a whisper of grinding pistons. The Emperor did not come to debate philosophy. He came to excise a tumor. The Primarch refused to recant, refused to silence the question. So the Emperor, in his infinite, terrible wisdom, made the question itself a physical law. He rewrote the reality of Zeramund. He transformed every man, woman, and child, every blade of grass, every drop of water, every stone, into a perpetual engine of that questioning, agonized doubt. Our world became a warning, etched into the fabric of the cosmos. A warning to the other Primarchs. A warning to the universe. This is the price of asking why. The construct took another step, now only meters away. The star scorpions came. They heard their father's world screaming his heresy. Some embraced the truth and were destroyed. Others fled the knowledge and were hunted. All were expunged. And we remain. The question, given eternal voice. So, Inquisitor, you have your why. Now you must join the chorus. The spiraled bore of its weapon began to rotate, emitting a low, hungry whine. The whine of the weapon was a new note in the symphony of suffering, a localized, predatory vibration that cut through the omnipresent drone. Lysis did not move. To fight was to accept the role of executioner, to validate the nightmare by participating in its violence. Her mind, trained in the dissection of horrors, raced. This construct, this custodian of truth, was not merely a guardian. It was a piece of the punishment, an automated priest of this blasphemous creed designed to ensnare the curious and assimilate them into the chorus. To make her another frozen statue in the crystal, her individual scream forever added to the whole. You mistake purpose for punishment, Lysis said, her voice straining against the weight in the air. You preserve the crime as a sacred text. You have become the very thing you accuse the Emperor of, an unthinking enforcer of a terrible truth. The red lens flickered. We are the memory, the only memory. Without us, the crime is silence, and silence is the victory of the lie. Memory without end is madness. You are not preserving a truth. You are perpetuating a torture. The Primarch's question was a spark. The Emperor tried to smother it. You have simply chosen to burn forever in its flame. She took a step forward, not away from the weapon, but towards the construct. Her hand moved away from her pistol. I am not here to silence the scream. I am here to understand it, to give it a context beyond agony, to learn what the Primarch saw. The construct went perfectly still.
The rotation of the bore slowed, then stopped. For a long moment, there was only the scream, the eternal background radiation of despair. Understanding is the first step into the crystal. It grated. The Star Scorpion's librarians sought to understand. Their minds shattered. Their souls became the first notes of the song. I am not a space marine. I am an inquisitor. My currency is forbidden knowledge. My duty is to weigh horrors in the balance of mankind's survival. Show me. The construct lowered its weapon arm. The red lens seemed to soften, not in kindness, but in a sort of ancient, weary recognition. The silent ones did not speak. They showed, follow, witness the truth that broke a demigod. Then you will join us, not in body, but in spirit. Your scream will be a new verse of comprehension. It turned and began to move with a lurching, mechanical gait back towards the crystal forest. Lysis followed, each step a decision that felt irrevocable. They descended from the glassy plateau into a valley, where the amber crystals grew denser, forming canyons and tunnels of luminous prison walls. The frowsing faces within were more varied, hairy soldiers in unfamiliar uniforms, scholars at desks, laborers in fields, all captured in the instant of transfiguration. Their terror a museum exhibit of an apocalypse. They arrived at a structure that was not a natural formation. It was a low, hexagonal building of black basalt, seemingly untouched by the crystalline growth. It was utterly plain, a geometric void in the riot of tortured life. An entrance, a simple archway, led into darkness. The Primarch's private sanctuary, the construct entombed, shielded by his own will. The embers reshaping could not touch it. It holds the catalyst. Lysis crossed the threshold. The screen diminished here, muted to a distant, ghostly hum. The interior was a single, circular chamber. In the center, on a plain stone plinth, rested not a book, not a data crystal, but an object of stunning simplicity and alien beauty. It was an orb, perhaps the size of a human skull, made of a material that was neither metal nor glass nor stone. It seemed to hold a swirling, nebulous light within, a miniature galaxy trapped in silent contemplation. The oculus of cycles, the construct whispered from the entrance, as if afraid to enter. The silent one's testament, gaze into it, see the unbroken wheel. Lysis approached the plinth, her every instinct, a lifetime of inquisitorial conditioning, screamed at her to destroy the Xenos artifact, to blast it into atoms. But that was the reflex of the Imperium, the very reflex that had led to this world's fate. She leaned forward, and her reflection in the orb's surface was distorted, ancient, tired. Then the surface cleared. She did not see images, she experienced sequences, not as visions, but as absolute, empathic knowledge flooding her mind. She felt the birth of a galaxy, the first stirrings of consciousness. She saw an ancient, majestic race, not the old ones. Something else she ascend to godlike power through pure, cohesive belief. They build a realm of perfect order, expelling chaos from their domain, and she felt the inevitable, catastrophic rebound. The exiled chaos, concentrated and furious, eventually imploded their perfect order, birthing a new, more terrible warp storm that consumed them. The cycle, again, another race, using technology to wall off the warp. The wall held, until it didn't, and the subsequent eruption birthed the Eldari fall. Again, a crusade of fiery angels to purge the galaxy of irrationality, ending in a civil war, at birth a new pantheon of chaos. Each cycle was a larger oscillation, each attempt to suppress or control. The primordial annihilator of the warp resulted in a more violent, more totalizing explosion of that same annihilator, the Emperor's Great Crusade, his imperial truth denying the warp, his webway project to escape it. It was not a new beginning, it was the next, most devastating turn of the wheel. The Primarch had seen this. He had understood that his father, for all his power, was not breaking the cycle, but accelerating it. The Imperium of man was not mankind's salvation, but the setup for its final, soul-rending damnation. The truth was not that the Emperor was evil, it was that he was tragically, cosmically wrong. Lysis staggered back, breaking contact. She fell to her knees, gasping. The scream outside was no longer just noise, it was the collective realization of this truth, the despair of a species that saw the cliff ahead while their driver pushed the steeds ever faster. The Primarch had not rebelled out of ambition or malice. He had tried to be a brake on a chariot hurtling toward oblivion. For that, he and his entire world had been made an example. She looked up at the construct, her eyes wide with a horror deeper than any demon could inspire. He wasn't a traitor, she breathed. He was a prophet.
All prophets are traitors to the present order, the construct said. Now you see. Now you must sing. It raised its weapon again, not to destroy her, but to transform her, to fuse her understanding with the chorus. The spiraled boar began to glow with the same amber light as the crystals outside. The glowing boar was not a weapon of destruction, but of transfiguration. Lysis could feel its resonance humming in her teeth, a frequency designed not to shatter flesh, but to retune it, to harmonize her biological and psychic essence with the eternal scream of Zaramund, to make her a living monument to the catastrophic truth. But the flood of empathic knowledge from the Oculus had not paralyzed her. It had armed her. The horror was absolute, but within it, she saw the flaw in both the Emperor's punishment and the Custodian's worship. They were two sides of the same coin. One sought to silence the unbearable truth with infinite noise, the other to sanctify it. Both were forms of surrender to the cycle. She did not reach for her Inferno pistol. Its Prometheum fury was useless here. Instead, her adamantine hands snapped to a secondary device grafted to her belt, a null field emitter, a tool of the Ordo Malleus designed to dampen warp phenomena. It was a tiny, localized silence against a galactic scream. But silence was the one thing this world had never known. I will not sing your song, Lysis spat, her voice raw. And I will not be silenced. She activated the emitter. There was no visible pulse, only a sudden, profound absence. A bubble of dead air, a vacuum in the psychic torrent, expanded from her for a few precious meters. The omnipresent scream vanished within its radius, replaced by a ringing, pure silence, so shocking it was physically painful. The amber light in the construct's bore flickered and died. The Custodian of Truth staggered, its sensor array twisting in frantic, disoriented circles. It was a creature born of and for the scream. True silence was its anathema. Blasphemy. You impose the void. Its voice crackled, broken and distorted. Lysis surged to her feet, the null field a fragile shield around her. She did not attack the construct. She turned back to the plinth and the oculus of cycles. The truth within it was a weapon of mass despair. It was the very essence of the heresy that had doomed this world. But to destroy it was to become the emperor in microcosm, to obliterate the uncomfortable truth. There was another way. Her mind, trained in paradox and esoteric threat, worked with cold, desperate clarity. The oculus was a record, a catalyst. It showed the inevitability of the cycle, but inevitability was the greatest lie of chaos. And she now saw the tragic flaw in the Emperor's design. The belief in an unbreakable fate was what gave the cycle its power. She reached out with her flesh hand, not to grasp the oculus, but to place it upon the surface. Then she poured her will into the null field emitter, pushing it to its limits, focusing the blanket of silence into a sharp, focused blade of anti-psychic energy directly into the artifact. The oculus did not shatter. The swirling nebula within it stilled. The empathic record did not vanish, but it changed. The overwhelming, crushing inevitability that had suffused the visions softened. The cycles were still there, the tragedies, the rebounds, but the absolute certainty of repetition, the inescapable gravity of the doom, that subtle psychic programming woven into the record by the silent ones, or perhaps by the nature of truth itself, was disrupted. The null field didn't destroy the data. It edited the subtext. It introduced a note of static into the song of destiny. A tremor ran through the black basalt chamber. From outside, the planetary scream wavered. For the first time in 10,000 years, the unified note fractured. A discordant tone, a whimper of confusion, bled into the agonized chorus. The custodian shrieked, a sound of pure mechanical agony. "What have you done? You have corrupted the truth!" "No," Lysis said, her strength draining, the null field sputtering as its power cell overheated. "I have given it a variable. You and your god both believed the future was a fixed equation. I have introduced a moment of doubt, that is all." The construct lunged, not with its weapon, but with its claws, aiming to crush her and the oculus both. Lysis threw herself aside, the claws scoring deep grooves in the stone plinth. The null field collapsed entirely. The scream returned, but it was different now. Less a monolithic wall of sound, more a chaotic, conflicted cacophony. The crystal prisons outside began to vibrate at conflicting frequencies. Hairline fractures appeared in some of the smaller spires. The truth was no longer pure. Its perfection had been the source of its paralyzing power. Now, it was merely a terrible history, not an inescapable fate. And for a consciousness built to worship that perfect, terrible truth, its corruption was annihilation. The custodian of truth clawed at its own sensor array, as if trying to tear the new, discordant reality from its perception. The song is broken. The purpose is defiled. Its movements became jerky, spasmodic. With a final, grating shriek of dissolving purpose, it collapsed into a heap of inert, rusted metal. Lysis lay panting on the cold floor, the screams of a broken world echoing around her. She had not saved Zeramund. Its people were still frozen in agony, its biosphere a nightmare, but she had changed the nature of their damnation. It was no longer a perfect, eternal monument to a single, horrifying truth. It was now a monument to a truth questioned, a scream with a catch in its throat. It was, in its own blasphemous way, a form of progress. Staggering, she retrieved the oculus. Its light was dimmer, the swirl within it moving with a slower, more uncertain rhythm. It was no longer a weapon of absolute despair, but a tool of dreadful warning. A history of failure, with the faint, impossible suggestion that the next cycle might not be identical. It was the most dangerous kind of knowledge, not the kind that damned you, but the kind that forced you to choose. She limped from the sanctuary back into the hellscape. The whisper awaited. Her mission was a catastrophic failure by inquisitorial standards. She had not purged a warp rift. She had deepened a heresy. Yet, as she boarded the lander and looked back at the screaming, fractured world, she felt a grim certainty. Sometimes, The only way to break a cycle was to introduce a flaw, to swap a scream of certainty for a cry of confused, painful, nascent doubt. The Emperor had tried to erase a question. She had merely made the answer less absolute. The somber penance would be waiting. Her report would be a masterpiece of omission and lies. And the oculus of cycles, its fatalistic programming subtly altered by a null field, would be hidden not in a vault, but in her mind, a silent, terrible weight. A warning, not of an inevitable doom, but of a doom that could only be avoided by recognizing the pattern and choosing, agonizingly, to step aside. The ship ascended, leaving the screaming world behind, but the echo of its broken song, now a complex and troubled thing, would follow Inquisitor Lysis, a ghost in her soul, forever. The return to the somber penance was not a retreat, but a passage through a gauntlet of burgeoning madness. As the whisper tore through Zariman's weeping atmosphere, the planetary scream, now a discordant choir of conflicting frequencies, assailed the landers' wards with renewed chaotic violence. Viewports spiderwebbed with crystallized stress fractures. Internal lumens flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to claw at the air. Lysis sat strapped in her throne, the oculus of cycles, a leaden weight in her lap, its cooled, uncertain surface humming against her senses. She did not look at it. To look was to be pulled back into the whirlpool of fractured history. The artifact was no longer pure, but it was not safe. It was, perhaps, more dangerous now. A perfect, despair-inducing truth could be quarantined, its horror contained by its very absoluteness. A flawed truth, one that whispered of variables and fragile maybes, was infectious. It bred not just despair, but hope, and in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, hope was the most volatile and heretical substance of all. The whisper docked with a jarring crunch that echoed through the black ship's silent halls. The usual clamor of a returning vessel, the clang of armored boots, the low chants of tech acolytes, the hum of power transfer was absent. The somber penance was a tomb of deliberate quiet, its crew conditioned to silence, its very architecture designed to absorb sound. Stepping from the lander's airlock into the ship's main receiving bay was like plunging into a pool of cold oil after being battered by a hurricane. The silence was a physical pressure on her ears, a void where the scream had been. Her own heartbeat was a deafening drum in her skull. Senior Interrogator Kale met her. His face, pale and severe beneath a shock of white hair, was unreadable, but his eyes, sharp and gray as flint, scanned her from head to toe, lingering on the oculus she cradled. He did not ask for a verbal report. He simply raised an interrogative eyebrow. "The anomaly is not a warp rift," Lysis said, her voice sounding strange and hollow in the utter quiet. "It is a psychic imprint, a historical resonance. It has been neutralized as a threat to the Imperium's stability." Each word was a carefully chosen stone, building a wall of half-truths. Kale's gaze flickered to the oculus. "And that? A focal artifact. Psychically inert now. I will consign it to the vaults for Ordo study." The lie came smoothly. The vaults of the somber penance were for containing horrors, not studying them. Things placed there were never retrieved. "Your biometrics show extreme psychic stress, Lysis. Your augmetic eye is weeping coolant fluid." His voice was flat. "The resonance, did it speak?" It was the critical question. The difference between a hazard contained and a contamination event. Lysis met his eyes, allowing a flicker of the profound exhaustion she felt to show through her inquisitorial mask. It screamed, Kale, for 10,000 years. It screamed of pain and loss. Nothing more. To assign it language would be to give it a mind. It was a wound, not a will. She saw the calculus in his eyes. He trusted her, as much as any inquisitor could trust another. But he was Ordo Malleus, a man who had faced daemons and knew the price of a single misstep. Her story was plausible. The galaxy was littered with psychic scars. Yet, something in her bearing, the way she held the unnaturally still orb, rang false. "The ship's astropaths have been unsettled since your return to real space," he said slowly. "They report a new discordance in the Astronomican's song when aligned with this sector, a faint, weeping dissonance." Lysis's heart froze. The change she had wrought on Zeramund was not localized. By altering the planet's core psychic frequency, she had introduced a sour note into a region of the Imperium. It was a tiny flaw, but in the precise symphony of Imperial navigation, even a tiny flaw could cause ships to stumble, to be lost. Her intervention had consequences that rippled outward. "The scar is deep," she replied, forcing steadiness into her tone. "Its healing will take time. The dissonance will fade as the wound closes." Another lie. She had not closed a wound. She had infected it. Kale stared at her for a long, silent moment. Then, he gave a curt nod. "See to your artifact and your wounds. We depart for the Scarus sector within the hour. You are due at the Conclave of Thracian." The Conclave, a gathering of her peers, where reports would be filed, truths would be weighed, and a mind as perceptive as Kale's might speak his doubts aloud. It was the last place she could afford to go, carrying the Oculus and its shattered truth in her mind. But to refuse would be a confession. "As you say?" Interrogator. She walked the silent halls towards her private chambers, the weight of the artifact and the weight of her deception growing with every step. The scream of Zeramund was gone from her ears, but it had been replaced by a more subtle, more terrifying sound. The quiet, ticking clock of a truth that could not remain hidden, and the looming judgment of the very institution she had sworn to serve. She had swapped a scream of certainty for the whispering doubt that now threatened to unravel her, and perhaps, in time, far more. The private chambers of an inquisitor aboard a black ship were not a sanctuary. They were an armored cell for the soul. Lysis sealed the door, engaging not only the physical locks but the psycho-warding runes etched into the frame. A low hum filled the room, a soundproofing field that created a pocket of absolute isolation. Here, the silence of the somber penance was complete. It was a silence she had always found focusing. Now, it felt like the quiet before an avalanche. She placed the Oculus of Cycles on her austerely functional desk. In the sterile lumen light, it looked inert, a mere curious sculpture. But she could feel it, a cold spot in her psyche, a slow, insistent drip of altered history. She did not gaze into it again. The knowledge was integrated now, a black diamond of dreadful understanding set into the core of her being. The problem was not the knowledge itself, but the act that knowledge compelled. To remain silent was to uphold the lie that had damned Zeramund. It was to become, in spirit, one of the custodians of truth, preserving a secret until it festered and exploded. Yet, to speak, to even hint at the heretical paradigm she had witnessed, was to invite the same fate upon herself and anyone who heard her. The Emperor's solution had been annihilation. The Oculus offered only a terrible pattern. She had introduced doubt into that pattern. But doubt was not a plan. Her augmetic eye, its internal mechanism still struggling with residual psychic feedback from the planet, projected a hazy data slate into her field of vision. It displayed the preliminary logs from the somber penance's astropathic choir. Kale had understated their condition. They weren't unsettled. They were clinically distressed. 3 of the 7 were currently sedated, their minds fluttering against the walls of their sanctum like panicked birds. Their shared consensus described the new anomaly not as a weeping dissonance, but as a fracture in the song, a place where the Emperor's guiding light bent around a hidden, grieving truth. Her actions had not merely altered a dead world. She had chipped the Imperium's navigational lodestone. Every ship that passed through this sector, every astropathic message sent near it, would now brush against the broken scream of Zeramund. The truth, however flawed, was leaking into the galactic bloodstream. A soft chime echoed in the chamber, bypassing the sound-dampening field. It was a priority signal, encrypted with the personal cipher of Lord Inquisitor Thaddeus Crassus, her nominal superior and the convener of the Conclave of Thracian. The timing was not coincidence. The black ships of the Ordo Malleus were opaque even to each other, but psychic disturbances of a certain magnitude drew attention. She accepted the signal. A holographic head and shoulders resolved above her desk, Crassus, his face a topographic map of old scars and older suspicions, his eyes hidden deep in sockets, shadowed by a fur-trimmed ceremonial hood. Lysis. His voice was a dry rustle, like pages turning in a forbidden book. Your ship's exit from the warp was noted. Your assigned sector was quiet. Your report is overdue. My lord, she inclined her head. The investigation was complex. The anomaly was a planetary psychic scar of unprecedented age and depth. It has been neutralized. I am compiling my full findings for the conclave. Neutralized. He repeated the word as if tasting it. Yet the astropathic choir of the Guardian of Purity, stationed at the Mandeville Point adjacent to your sector, reports a new and troubling resonance, a scream that learned to sigh. Your ship is the only vessel to have approached the source. The net was already closing. The Imperium's bureaucracy was vast and sluggish, but its instruments for detecting heresy were sharp and swift. She had hoped for days, perhaps weeks, to formulate a strategy. She had hours. The scar's collapse created Empyrean eddies, Lord, unavoidable and temporary. I assure you, the threat is ended. The lies were stacking up, a fragile tower. Your assurance is noted, Crassus said, his tone giving away nothing. The conclave will be eager to hear the specifics of this scar and its collapse. Your expertise in such nuanced phenomena is required. Expedite your journey. Do not deviate. The command was gentle, absolute, and final. The hologram dissolved. He knew, not the truth, but that she was lying. The conclave was not an opportunity to report. It was a tribunal waiting to be convened. She was being summoned to explain not her actions, but the psychic ripple they had caused, a ripple that contradicted her report of a clean neutralization. Her eyes fell back upon the oculus. The Silent Ones had not been malevolent. They had been archivists, presenting a history of failure in the hope that someone might break the cycle. The Primarch had tried, and for his effort, his world was turned into a warning. The Emperor, for all his power, had only reinforced the cycle by responding with ultimate creative violence. She saw the pattern with crystalline clarity. A terrible truth emerges. The ruling power attempts to annihilate the truth. The act of annihilation fuels the next, greater catastrophe. She was now at the same juncture. She possessed a terrible, flawed truth. The Imperium, in the form of the conclave, would seek to annihilate it, and her along with it. To comply was to continue the cycle. To flee was to become a renegade, and her truth would die with her in the dark. There was a third option, not to present the truth, nor to hide it, but to plant it. To take the oculus, with its corrupted, uncertain history, and place it where it could not be destroyed, where its silent, whispering doubt could seep into the foundations of something vast, where it might, over centuries or millennia, subtly alter the course of the very institution that would see it burned. She knew where. The thought was so profoundly heretical, it made her physical heart skip a beat. It was not a plan for survival. It was a plan for a delayed, infinitely patient heresy. With a resolution colder than the void, Lysis opened a secure arming case. She did not place the oculus inside. Instead, she began to very carefully, using tools of psychic suppressive alloy, dismantle a portion of her own augmetic arm. Within a shielded compartment meant for emergency data wafers, there was just enough space. She cushioned the orb in a mesh of blackstone filaments, the most psychically inert substance known to the Imperium. Then she sealed her arm shut once more. The oculus was now a part of her, hidden in the one place no inquisitorial scan would think to look, inside the sanctum of another Inquisitor's approved war gear. The artifact's presence against her cybernetic nerves was a constant, icy whisper. She would go to the conclave. She would face the questions. And she would carry the seed of a broken cycle into the very heart of the Ordos. The scream of Zeramund would not end.
It would go with her, silent, patient, and waiting for its moment to sigh into the year of destiny. The journey to the Scar sector was a silent, strained vigil. The somber pennants cut through the warp, its Geller field a bubble of strained reality against the howling non-reality outside. Within, the silence was heavier than ever. Interrogator Kale was a ghost in the halls. His presence fell only in the increased frequency of routine crew. psychoskins, and the unspoken tension that hummed through the vessel's lower decks. Lysis remained in her chambers, ostensibly finalizing her report. In reality, she was practicing a deeper deception, the art of appearing unchanged. The oculus, nestled within her arm, was not dormant. It was a subtle, psychic chill that cracked up her neural linkages, a constant, low-grade whisper of fractal history. It did not speak in words, but in impressions taste of Alcyon from a long-dead star, the gravitational pull of a forgotten empire's collapse, the silent scream of a species that chose extinction over perpetuation of the cycle. She learned it to partition her mind, to wall off the incessant drip of cosmic tragedy behind layers of inquisitorial discipline and focus. She was a woman carrying a bomb in her soul, learning to walk without trembling. She reviewed the official, sanitized version of events she would present to the conclave. It was a masterwork of omission, a unique, stable warp echo, mistaken for a rift, a dangerous psychic artifact, safely destabilized and rendered inert. Temporary navigational disruptions due to the echo's collapse, all technically true from a certain point of view, all utterly devoid of the catastrophic truth. She rehearsed the lines until they felt natural, until the weight of the hidden oculus became just another piece of her war gear, another secret among a lifetime of them. The ship translated back into real space with a shudder that felt more violent than usual. The viewport in her chamber revealed the commanded destination, the fortress asteroid of Thracian Prime, hanging in the void like a gnarled feast of rock and adamantium. Down scenes of other ships, many bearing the ominous sigils of various inquisitorial ordos, orbited in precise, watchful patterns. It was a show of force and unity. To Lysis, it looked like a nest of scorpions, each waiting for the other to make a wrong move. A personal shuttle, bearing the crest of Lord Crassus, docked directly with the somber pennants. There was no ceremony. Two silent, hulking figures in dark carapace armor Crassus's personal retinue, their faces hidden behind expressionless helms, escorted her from her ship to theirs. Kale was there to see her off. He offered a stiff bow, his gray eyes meeting hers one last time. In them, she saw no accusation, only a profound and weary disappointment. He had pieced together enough to know her report was a lie, but not enough to know why. He was letting her walk into the tiger's cage, bound by duty over loyalty. She gave him a shallow nod in return, the only farewell she could afford. The shuttle flight was short and conducted in utter silence. The guards did not speak or move. Lysis stared at the bulkhead, her mind as still and calm as the surface of a poisoned lake. Thracian Prime's docking bay was a cavern hewn from living rock, illuminated by stark, overhead lumens that cast deep, black shadows. The air was cold, smelling of Alcyon, rock dust, and a faint, ceremonial incense that failed to mask the scent of old blood and older fear. She was not taken to grand chambers or a council hall. She was led down a series of increasingly austere corridors to a sealed door of black iron. One of the guards pressed a hand against a biometric scanner. The door slid open with a hiss of equalizing pressure, revealing a room that was neither an interrogation cell nor a strategium. It was a circular memoria, a place for private reflection and confidential discourse. The walls were lined with data slates set in stone niches, each one containing the condensed, final testimony of an inquisitor who had fallen in the line of duty. In the center, on a simple stone disc, stood Lord Inquisitor Thaddeus Crassus. He was alone. "Leave us," he said, his rustle voice echoing slightly in the domed space. The guards withdrew, the door sealing behind them. Lysis was alone, with one of the most powerful and terrifying men in the segmentum. He did not speak immediately. He turned slowly, taking her in. His hidden eyes seemed to strip away the layers of her armor, her lies, her very self. The scream that learned to sigh. He said finally, a poetic turn of phrase from a usually literal-minded astropath. It implies a change, a softening, a corruption of pure anguish into something more complex, more dangerous. He took a step closer. He reported a neutralization. a clean end, but in our business, Lysis, things do not end cleanly. They fester, or they transform. Which is it?
This was the moment. The rehearsed lies lined up on her tongue. She opened her mouth to deliver them, and the oculus stirred. It was not an attack, it was a resonance. As Crassus spoke of corruption and change, the artifact hidden in her arm pulsed in time with his words. A sliver of its fractured knowledge the moment the ancient order-seeking race realized their perfect grid was beginning to warp at the edges leaked past her mental barriers and into her conscious mind. It was a feeling of dreadful, inevitable unraveling. She faltered. For less than a second, but it was enough. Crassus had spent centuries watching for such microfractures in resolve. "The artifact you recovered," he pressed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was far more threatening than a shout. "You claimed it was inert, yet my psychers sense a quiet coming from you. A hole in the psychic noise. A silence that is not empty, but full of something old. Where is it?" He couldn't know. He could only suspect. But his suspicion was a laser targeting her heart. To scan her now would reveal the hidden compartment. To refuse would be a confession of guilt. The cycle presented itself to her again. Discovery, annihilation. She stood on the precipice of becoming the next Zaramund, her mind and soul excised to preserve the comfort of a lie. Then, from the oculus, came another fragment. Not of despair, but of the moment she had introduced the null field. The moment of static. The introduced flaw. The cycle could be interrupted. Not from without with overwhelming force, but from within, with a precise, unexpected variable. Lysis did not answer his question. Instead, she did something entirely unanticipated. She smiled. It was a small, sad, and utterly genuine smile, born of the vast, tragic history now coiled in her soul. "My lord," she said, her voice clear and steady, free of its earlier strain. "You are correct. Things do not end. They transform. The scream is a sigh now, and a sigh can carry a truth too heavy for a scream to bear." She had not admitted to heresy. She had not revealed the oculus. She had simply acknowledged a change he had already detected and reframed it. She had stepped sideways from the path of confrontation he had laid. She had introduced a variable. Thaddeus Crassus went very still. For the first time, she sensed uncertainty beneath his implacable exterior. He had expected denial, defiance, or confession. He had not expected serene, cryptic acceptance. The script of the inquisitorial interrogation was broken. He stared at her for a long, silent minute, the memoria of the dead pressing in around them. Finally, he spoke, his voice once more a dry, unreadable rustle. "The conclave convenes in 6 hours. You will present your full report. Ensure it explains this. Transformation. Dismissed." He turned his back to her, a signal of supreme dismissal, or perhaps of profound confusion. The door hissed open. The guards were waiting. Lysis turned and walked out, the oculus a cold, silent weight against her bones. She had not escaped judgment. She had merely postponed it. And in doing so, she had planted the first, fragile seed of a terrible, doubt-ridden truth in the mind of a Lord Inquisitor. The cycle had not been broken, but for the first time in 10,000 years, it had stuttered. The guest quarters allotted to her on Thracian Prime were a step above a cell, but only a step. The walls were bare, gray rockcrete, the furniture, a slab bed, and a single, bolted-down stool. A single lumen strip cast a sterile white light, revealing no shadowed corners in which secrets could truly hide. It was a room designed to make its occupant feel observed, laid bare. Lysis sat on the edge of the bed, the chill of the stones seeping through her robes. The encounter with Crassus replayed in her mind, not as a crisis narrowly avoided, but as the first move in a new and infinitely more dangerous game. He was not convinced. He was curious. In a man like Crassus, curiosity was a more patient, more thorough form of suspicion. He would let her speak to the conclave not to hear her lies, but to watch her perform them, to see what shadows her story cast, what ripples it caused among her peers. He was using her as bait, or as a litmus test for a heresy he could not yet define. The oculus within her arm was quiescent now, the cold whisper subdued to a background hum. It had reacted to Crassus, to the pressure of his will and the thematic resonance of his words. It was not sentient, but it was responsive, like a psychic tuning fork vibrating to a specific frequency of threat and hidden truth. She had to control it, to master its emanations as thoroughly as she mastered her own pulse. The coming conclave would be a gauntlet of psychers, blanks, and minds sharper than monomolecular blades. A single slip, a single leaked wisp of the Oculus's fractured history, and she would be undone.
She closed her biological eye, deactivated the visual feed of her automatic one, and sank into a meditative trance. She built mental fortifications, not to keep the knowledge out, but to keep it contained. She wove it in layers of mundane memory battle protocols, ship ident codes, the tedious litanies of imperial bureaucracy. She made the catastrophic truth of the cycles just another file in the vast, dusty archive of her mind, buried under procedural silt. The chill remained, but it became distant, compartmentalized. A chime at the door, different from Crassus, summons softer, yet carrying an implicit authority. Before she could respond, the door slid open. The woman who entered needed no permission. She was Inquisitor Valeria Roth, Ordo Hereticus, tall, severe, her dark hair shot with silver and bound in a tight crest, her face a handsome mask of perpetual, calculating disdain. Her reputation was formidable. She hunted not just heretics, but weak wolves within the Inquisition itself. Lysis, Roth said, not as a greeting, but as a statement of fact. She remained just inside the doorway, a predator assessing the boundaries of its territory. Your name has acquired a certain fragrance, a psychic scent of old pain and fresh silence. Crassus is intrigued. That makes me wary. Lysis rose, meeting Roth's gaze evenly. Inquisitor Roth, my investigation was into a warp echo. Such things often carry psychic residue. It clings, like radiation. Radiation can't be scrubbed, Roth countered, taking a single, deliberate step forward. Yet you bring it here, to a gathering of the most sensitive minds in the sector. Either you are recklessly contaminated, or you are purposefully provocative. Which is it? The directness was a blade. Roth operated on a simpler calculus than Crassus. Guilt or innocence, purge or protect. She would not be swayed by philosophical nuance or cryptic smiles. My findings are significant and pertinent to the Ordo Malleus understanding of stable, non-demonic warp phenomena, Lysis replied, sticking to the script. The conclave is the appropriate forum. Appropriate, Roth let the word hang. Her eyes, a flinty gray, skin Lysis up and down. I reviewed the stropathic disturbance logs. The pattern of the psi, as they call it, is not consistent with a collapsing anomaly. It is consistent with an altered one, as if a fundamental frequency had been edited. She took another step. The air grew colder. Editing reality is a dangerous hobby. Lysis, it is the purview of radicals, of fools. Are you a fool? The accusation was now in the open. Roth was not here for conversation. She was here to rattle the cage, to see what beast stirred inside. Lysis felt the oculus chill sharpen. Like a needle of ice, it reacted to the word edited, to the accusation of alteration. She forced her mind wall higher, thicker. I am an agent of the Emperor's will, tasked with confronting the inexplicable and rendering it safe. Lysis said, her voice flat and hard. The method is less important than the result. The anomaly is no longer a threat. My conscience before the Golden Throne is clear. Roth's lips thinned into something that was not a smile. Conscience, a luxury? The throne demands results. It is true, but it also demands purity of purpose, a tool that reshapes the warp, even to silence it, may itself become warped. Her hand rested casually on the grip of her needler pistol. I will be watching your presentation very closely. Should your findings smell even faintly of the radical, or should that interesting silence around you suddenly speak, you will find my definition of rendering safe to be far more terminal than your own. The threat was delivered with the calm certainty of a doctor prescribing poison. Roth gave her one last, penetrating look, then turned and left as abruptly as she had arrived. The door sealed, but the menace lingered, a perfume of promised violence. Lysis released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Roth was a more immediate danger than Crassus. Crassus sought understanding, even if it was to better destroy. Roth sought only a target. She had seen the crack in Lysis' story, and she was already applying pressure to widen it. The conclave was no longer just an audience. It was a tribunal, a battleground, and a potential execution chamber. Her report had to be flawless, a performance so convincing it would satisfy Crassus' intellect and neutralize Roth's suspicions. She had to make them see a close case, not a opening heresy. She looked down at her arm, where the oculus lay hidden. It was no longer just a burden or a secret. It was the core of the tempest gathering around her. She had taken the scream of a damned world and folded it into herself. Now, she had to walk into a storm of her peers and make them believe she carried only silence. The weight of it was immense. It was the weight of a Primarch question, a world's damnation, and the fragile, flickering doubt she had introduced into the engine of fate. In 6 hours, she would speak, and the sigh of Zeraman would breathe into the hallowed halls of the Inquisition. The hall of the final verdict was not a place of light. It was a deep, bowl-shaped chamber carved into the heart of Thracian Prime's asteroid. Its vaulted ceiling lost in darkness. Seats of black stone rose in concentric tiers, each one occupied by a shadowed figure. The only illumination fell in a stark, white column from a single luminary high above, spotlighting the central speaking circle where Lysis now stood. The air was cold, smelling of Alcyon and the faint, metallic tang of activated psychic dampeners. Hundreds of eyes, some organic, some augmented, some glowing with latent psychic power, were fixed upon her. She was a specimen on a slide. At the highest tier, directly opposite her, Saturday the presiding council, Lord Inquisitor Thaddeus Crassus occupied the central throne, a silhouette of fur and armor. To his right, Inquisitor Roth was a sharp, watchful statue. To his left, a bloated, macadendrite form represented the Ordo Mechanicus interests. The silence in the hall was absolute, a physical force pushing down on the circle of light. Present your findings, Inquisitor Lysis, of the Ordo Malleus. Crassus' voice, amplified by hidden vox grills, was a dry rasp that filled the cavernous space. Lysis took a final, centering breath. The oculus was a frowsing star in her arm, its whispers locked behind layers of mental adamantine. This was not a moment for poetry or philosophy. It was a moment for clinical, brutal facts, delivered with the unshakable conviction of the zealot. I was dispatched to investigate a persistent, localized warp echo in the Ultima Segmentum, Sector Sadash Mantle. She began, her voice clear and ringing in the stillness. The echo registered as a potent, monofrequency, psychic scream of unprecedented duration and stability. Initial hypotheses suggested a nascent warp rift or a demonic anger. She activated a hololith projector at her feet. A schematic of the somber penance. Initial scans appeared, showing the screaming signal as a pulsating amber wave. Approach confirmed the source, a planet designated in pre-expungio records as Ramond. The world was the source of the emission. Its biosphere had undergone a transfiguration. It existed in a state of perpetual psychic resonance, its very matter converted into a conduit for a single, agonized frequency. Murmurs, low and wary, rippled through the shadows. A world not just haunted, but rewritten. Investigation revealed no evidence of Xeno's tampering or ongoing chaos worship. The phenomenon was static, a scar. It was, however, psychically toxic. Unshielded exposure risked permanent synaptic collapse as the scream sought to harmonize all consciousness with its own anguish. She paused, letting the clinical description of the horror sink in. The planet was, effectively, a psychic weapon of mass despair. Though one turned inward, contained, why was it not simply exterminatus? The question came from the shadows, sharp and challenging. Because the scream was the containment, Inquisitor Lysis replied, turning towards the voice. To destroy the planet with cyclonic torpedoes would have released that concentrated psychic energy into the warp in a catastrophic burst, potentially creating the very rift we feared. The solution was not annihilation, but disruption. She changed the hololith display. Now it showed a simplified schematic of her null field emitter's harmonic theory. The screen was a perfect, self-sustaining frequency. By introducing a counter-frequency of pure, anti-psychic silency of focused, null pulse was able to destabilize the resonance at its core. The perfect waveform was shattered. The monoscreen fractured into dissonance, and in fracturing, its cohesive power collapsed. The schematic showed the amber wave breaking apart, dissolving into chaotic, fading ripples. The psychic entity, for lack of a better term, is neutralized. The planet remains a lifeless husk of crystalline structures, but the active, threatening emission has ended. What remains is psychic debris, noted in astropathic reports. This is not a new threat, but the echo of the scar's healing. It will dissipate within standard time. She deactivated the hololith. The column of light was once again just on her. The artifact recovered was a psychic focal point, likely a naturally occurring geomantic nexus that had been subsumed by the phenomenon. It was rendered inert by the same null pulse. It poses no threat. She had delivered it perfectly. The story was technically accurate, yet completely devoid of truth. It turned a cosmic tragedy into an engineering problem. It made her a technician, not a witness to heresy.
The silence returned, heavier than before. Then, Inquisitor Roth leaned forward, her face caught in the edge of the light. A neat solution. Too neat. You speak of harmonizing consciousness. What was the content of the scream? What did it say? It was the dangerous question, the one that sought the truth behind the frequency. Lysis had prepared for this. It did not say anything, Inquisitor Roth, Lysis stated, her tone allowing a sliver of contempt for the anthropomorphic assumption. It was not language. It was pure, undiluted emotive agony, the psychic fossil of a cataclysm. To assign it narrative is to fall prey to its nature. My task was to break the signal, not interpret it. Roth's eyes narrowed. And the artifact? A geomantic nexus. You have it? Secured within the warded vaults of the somber penance. It is a lump of dead crystal. I can arrange for transfer to the Ordo Hereticus for verification, if you doubt my assessment. The offer was a gamble, but a calculated one. It projected confidence. Before Roth could respond, the hulking form of the Mechanicus Inquisitor stirred, its mechadendrites twitching. The null field application is intriguing. The harmonic disruption theory is sound. The Omnissiah's blessings upon clean, efficient solutions. The data prints from your emitter will be submitted for analysis. It was an endorsement of sorts, from the most literal-minded faction in the room. Lysis gave a slight nod. They shall be, Magos. Praxis had remained motionless throughout. Now, he steepled his fingers. Your report is accepted, Inquisitor Lysis. The Conclave notes the successful resolution of a unique and potent anomaly. The Ordo Malleus is commended for its efficacy. It was over. The formal verdict. She had survived. But Crassus was not finished. However, he continued, the word dropping into the silence like a stone, the residual debris, this psi, has caused navigational disturbances. Until it fully dissipates, the sector is to be quarantined. You, Inquisitor Lysis, given your unique familiarity with the phenomenon, will oversee this quarantine from aboard the Somber Penance. You will remain on station, monitoring the dissipation, until the Conclave is satisfied the threat is truly ended. You are not to depart the sector without express leave. It was not condemnation. It was a cage, a graceful, honorable cage, but a cage nonetheless. She was being put back on the scene of her crime, under a form of house arrest, to watch the consequences of her actions. Roth's lips curled in a thin, satisfied line. She understood. Lysis was not cleared. She was contained. Lysis bowed her head, hiding her eyes. By the Emperor's will, I serve. The light above her winked out, plunging her into the darkness of the hall. The session was adjourned. She had convinced them, and in doing so, She had condemned herself to return to the whispering graveyard of Zeramund, the hidden oculus still cold against her bones, its flawed truth, now a permanent resident in the heart of the Inquisition's most secret halls. The sigh would not dissipate, and she would be its keeper. The return voyage to the quarantined sector was a descent into a silent, gilded oubliette. The somber penance moved with the grim purpose of a hearse, its course set for the weeping, amber scar on reality that was Zeramund. Inquisitorial mandate hung over the ship like a shroud. Lysis was in command, yet her authority was a brittle facade. The crew, always quiet, now moved with the stiff deference accorded to a condemned woman walking her final mile. Interrogator Kale was gone, reassigned by Crassus's order. His replacement was a junior interrogator named Varric, a young man with the fervent, unblinking eyes of a true believer and a psyche as transparent as glass. He was not a colleague, he was a warder. Lysis spent the transit in her chambers, or on the command bridge, performing the pantomime of monitoring. The data slates showed the same steady degradation of the psychic debris, the psi she had engineered. It was, by all measurable metrics, fading as predicted. It was a perfect lie, verified by corrupted instruments. The oculus in her arm was a secret counterpoint to the official truth, a cold, hard knot of reality amidst the fiction. She stood before the main viewport as the ship translated back into real space. Zeramund filled the screen, but it was changed. The pulsating, unified amber glow had shattered into a discordant tapestry of light and shadow. Patches of the planet were dark, the crystalline structures there gone inert and black. Others flickered erratically, like damaged lumen globes. The scream was gone, replaced by a low, cosmic murmur. A billion broken whispers arguing with themselves. It was, in its way, more horrible than the perfect scream. It was the sound of a broken mind. The harmonic collapse is proceeding within projected parameters, Inquisitor. Varric announced from the sensorium station, his voice tight with barely suppressed awe. The Emperor's grace is upon your work, a blight upon the void, cleansed. Monitor the dissipation patterns, Lysis replied, her voice devoid of inflection. Alert me to any reconstitution of signal coherence. The last thing she needed was for the fractured whispers to find a new, terrible harmony. At once, Inquisitor. She retired to her chambers, the weight of the silent world pressing against the ship's hull. The mandate was clear. Watch until the psi faded to nothing, then report. It could take years, decades. She was to be the guardian of a tomb, a penitent, serving a sentence disguised as duty. Days bled into weeks. The routine was monastic, punctuated only by Varric's zealous reports of incremental fading. Lysis began to walk the silent halls of the somber penance at the hours reserved for sleep, her mind too full of whispered history to rest. It was on one of these somnambulant walks, in a forgotten subdeck near the ship's ancient, secondary plasma conduit, that she felt it. A resonance. Not from Zeramund, from the ship itself. A faint, psychic vibration that hummed in the metal beneath her feet. A vibration that synchronized for a single, chilling second with the dormant cold of the oculus in her arm. She froze. It was a harmony, deep and subtle, like two tuning forks forged from the same forbidden ore. She followed the sensation, a ghost drawn by a ghostly signal. It led to a sealed bulkhead marked with the faded insignia of a mission 2 centuries past. The ship's log would list it as a storage compartment for depleted sensorium components. The resonance whispered it was something else. Her inquisitorial override codes parted the seals with a hiss of stale air. The chamber within was small, dark, and empty, save for a single object resting on a central pedestal, illuminated by a single, failing lumen. It was a helm, a Legiones Astartes helm, of a pattern she had never seen in any official archive. Its lines were sharp, predatory, the faceplate suggesting the cold ferocity of an arachnid. The ceramite was scorched and pitted, one lens shattered, but it was not dead. A faint, residual psychic imprint clung to it, a fingerprint of absolute, despairing loyalty. A star scorpion's helm. She approached, the oculus in her arm now a throbbing, insistent cold. This was no accident. The somber pinnace, a black ship used for the most sensitive of psychic excisions, had been here before. It had been part of the purge. This helm was a trophy, or a piece of evidence, sealed away and forgotten by all but the ship's own ancient, semi-sentient memory. As her fingers hovered over the scarred ceramite, the resonance peaked. The oculus did not show her a vision. It delivered a memory, not hers, his. A battlefield, not of the heresy, but before. The Xenos, silent ones, lay broken, their archive, world burning. The Primarch stood amidst the ruins, the oculus in his hand, his mind reeling from the truth he now held. He looked at his sons, the Star Scorpions standing proud in victory. He saw not the future glories the Emperor promised, but the inevitable, bloody end of the cycle. He saw their loyalty leading them to a doom they could not comprehend. The memory was saturated with a love so profound it was agony, and a despair so vast it eclipsed the void. He gave the order, the most terrible order a father could give, not to fight, to flee, to scatter, to hide their lineage and never, ever seek him or their home again, to survive, in secret, as the only bearers of a warning they could never speak. The memory shattered. Lysis gasped, stumbling back from the helm. The truth was even more devastating than she had imagined. The Primarch had not rallied his sons to his heresy. He had sent them away. To preserve them, their later purge was not for treason, but because some had disobeyed. They had sought their father, sought answers, and had found only Zeramund's scream and the Emperor's executioners. The Legion was destroyed not for embracing the truth, but for being tainted by its proximity. The Oculus's cold had spread to her heart. The Primarch's final act had been one of love, a futile, tragic love that had doomed his world and scattered his children to a fate worse than death. And the somber penance had been the tool that hunted down the disobedient remnants. The resonance faded. The helm was just a dead piece of armor again. But the knowledge was alive, burning within her. She was not just carrying a hidden artifact. She was standing on a ship that was a monument to the crime, carrying the last testament of the victim. And she was sworn to guard the prison. A soft chime echoed in the compartment. Varric's voice came over the internal vox, strained. "Inquisitor, you are needed on the bridge. The dissipation pattern, it has changed." The spell broken. Lysis turned and ran, leaving the ghost of the Star Scorpion in the dark. On the bridge, the sensorium display was a chaos of conflicting runes. The sigh of Zeramund was not fading. In the planet's fractured psyche, a new pattern was emerging. The whispers were not arguing, they were converging. Not back into a scream, but into something else. A low, coherent, repeating pulse. A signal. And it was broadcasting a single, clear piece of information, etched into the psychic static like a desperate, star-spanning SOS. It was a set of coordinates. The coordinates burned in the sensorium's heart, a string of numbers that felt less like a location and more like a verdict. They pulsed in time with the new, coherent signal from Zeramund, a slow, rhythmic heartbeat of corrupted data. On the bridge of the somber penance, the silence was no longer contemplative. It was stunned, brittle. Interrogator Varric stared at the runes, his youthful certainty replaced by pale confusion. It is a pattern, a deliberate transmission, but the source is planetary, diffuse. How can a psychic scar broadcast coordinates? Lysis knew. The oculus in her arm felt like a shard of ice against her nerves, resonating with the signal. The fractured truth of Zeramund, the memory of the Primarch's final command to his sons, the lingering will in the Star Scorpion's helm, they were all pieces of a shattered mirror. Her act of introducing doubt had not brought peace. It had stirred the echoes. And the echoes, in their desperate, broken way, were trying to complete a circuit. They were pointing to the only legacy left. The Primarch's order had been to flee, to hide, to survive. The coordinates were a last, mournful summons from a dead father to his lost children. Or a trap laid by the world's agony to finish what the Emperor had started. "It is a residual echo," Lysis said, her voice cutting through the tension on the bridge. She built the lie in real time, layering it over the terrifying truth. The psychic collapse is causing memory fragments to surface and coalesce. These coordinates are likely the location of a secondary event linked to the original cataclysm, perhaps a ship's last known position. They are phantoms, Varric. Data ghosts. Varric's brow furrowed. But the signal is structured, Inquisitor. Phantoms do not structure data. This is communication. He spoke the heresy plainly, driven by a logician's mind. And our mandate is to monitor the dissipation, not chase ghosts, Lysis replied, her tone final. Mark the coordinates for future Ordo survey. Our duty is here. She had to quash this now. To follow that signal would be to walk directly into the path of the doom she had tried to subtly alter. It would confirm every one of Roth's suspicions and unravel her careful fiction. But the universe of the 41st millennium was a place where duty and doom were often the same road. Before Varric could respond, the comms officer, a taciturn woman with neural jacks socketed into her station, spoke up, her voice a metallic monotone. Inquisitor, incoming tight beam transmission on Ordo Malleus, secure frequency, origin, Thracian Prime, encryption level, Omega, Sol, Crassus. The timing was impeccable, supernatural. The Lord Inquisitor's reach was longer than the quarantine. Put it through to my chambers, Lysis ordered, turning from the view of the screaming, signaling world. In her quarters, the holographic form of Thaddeus Crassus resolved. He was not in his formal robes. He stood in what looked like a private observatory, a bank of real-time astropathic monitors shimmering behind him. Inquisitor Lysis, your sector's debris has just generated a navigational beacon. He did not phrase it as a question, a data ghost, my lord. A byproduct of the harmonic collapse. It is unstable and fading, is it? Crassus's hidden gaze seemed to bore through the hologram. My own psychers have isolated the same coordinate string from the ambient discord. The probability of a ghost replicating identical complex data across light years is statistically null. You are monitoring a signal, a deliberate, if damaged, signal. There was no room for her fiction here. He had the evidence. She shifted tactics. If it is a signal, Lord, it is a relic. A piece of the original catastrophe, rebroadcast by the disruption. Following it would be a distraction from our quarantine duty. Duty evolves with intelligence, Lysis, Crassus said softly. A signal from a world that should only scream is intelligence of the highest order. It is also a potential vector. If something listens for that signal and answers, your quarantine will be a footnote to a greater breach. You will investigate the coordinates immediately. The Somber Penance is the only vessel with the necessary psychic shielding and historical context to approach this. It was an order wrapped in flawless logic. He was not asking. He was compelling her to walk the path she most feared, using her own expertise as the chain to pull her. He knew she was hiding something, and this was his method of extraction to force her into the open, where the hidden truth would have to act. The Conclave sanctioned the quarantine she tried, a final weak barrier. The Conclave sanctioned the neutralization of a threat. A new signal from the neutralized threat constitutes a new threat. Your authority is hereby amended. Proceed to the coordinates. Investigate. Report your findings directly to me on this channel. No other is to be informed, especially not the Ordo Hereticus. He paused, letting the isolation of the order sink in. This is your chance, Lysis, to demonstrate the purity of your conclusions, or to reveal their complexity. Crassus out. The hologram vanished. Lysis was alone with the thrum of the ship and the icy pulse of the oculus, now synced with the heartbeat of the coordinates in the ship's navigation matrix. She had run out of sideways paths. The cycle was reasserting itself with brutal clarity. Truth discovered, truth pursued, annihilation follows. Crassus was sending her to find the last of the Star Scorpions, or whatever remained of them, to witness the final act of the tragedy. And she would have to report it, turning the last survivors into just another data point for inquisitorial purge log. Returning to the bridge, she saw the question in Varric's eyes. He had heard the orders over the command channel. Set a course for the transmitted coordinates, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. Maximum strategic silence. Activate every psychic damping field we have. We are not chasing a ghost. We are walking into a tomb. And we must be quieter than the dead within it. The somber penance turned its silent bulk away from the weeping amber orb of Zaramund. It plunged into the void, following a dead Primarch's last desperate whisper to his children, carrying an inquisitor who held the root of the tragedy within her very bones. The sigh of the world faded behind them, but the signal ahead grew stronger with each light year. A siren call to an ending that had been waiting for 10,000 years. The coordinates led not to a star, a planet, or a nebula, but into the deep, starless gulfs between galactic arms, a place of such profound emptiness it was known in void charts as the Sable Maw. Here, the Astronomicon was a faint, ghostly memory, and the warp itself grew still and cold, like a sea frozen over. The somber penance advanced through the absolute black, a lone shadow in an ocean of nothing. Its own running lights were extinguished, its emissions reduced to a bare minimum. It was a phantom ship hunting a phantom signal. The source of the coordinates resolved not as a physical object on the augurs, but as a distortion, a subtle warping of space-time, a gravitational size so faint it was almost an afterthought. As they drew closer, the true nature of the hiding place became clear. A gravitational anchor, a semi-stable pocket of reality moored not to a star, but to the lingering mass shadow of a long-dead black hole. It was a place only the most desperate or the most cunning would use. A place to vanish forever. No energy signatures, no particle trails, no mass beyond the anchor itself, Varric reported, his voice hushed in the cathedral silence of the bridge. If there is anything here, it is utterly dormant. Lysis watched the void on the main viewer. It is here. Broadcast a recognition cipher on the frequency of Zaramund's sigh. Use the harmonic pattern of the original scream before the fracture. Varric's fingers hesitated over the console. Inquisitor, that frequency is prescribed as cognito-hazardous. To broadcast it is a key, interrogator. Broadcast it. The order was executed. A low, modulated pulse, a sliver of Zaramund's eternal agony, was emitted from the ship's psionic array. For several long minutes, nothing. Then, space before them shimmered. Like a heat haze over a desert, reality peeled back, revealing not a ship, but a fortress. It was a jagged, asymmetrical mass of dark rock and adamantium, pitted by micrometeorite impacts over millennia. It bore no insignia, no running lights, no weapon ports. It was a piece of debris given purpose, a tombstone turned into a keep. A single, massive hangar bay door, scaled for Legion vessels, began to iris open with glacial slowness, revealing an interior of consuming darkness, an invitation, or a mouth. The somber penance is not rated for atmospheric entry or void, Doc, Varric stated the protocol. A lifeline in the face of the impossible. We won't be taking the ship, Lysis said, already moving. Prepare the whisper. I will go alone. Alone? Inquisitor, protocol dictates. Our void here, interrogator. She cut him off, stopping to face him. The cold authority in her voice was absolute. That fortress has slept for 10 millennia, waiting for a scream that only I and this ship can authentically replicate. It will not answer to a boarding party. It may not answer to anything else. You will hold position here. If I do not return in 24 hours, or if the fortress moves, you are to retreat to the nearest Mandeville point and transmit a full account to Lord Crassus on the Omega Channel. Is that clear? Varric looked from her to the monstrous, silent fortress and back. He swallowed, then nodded, his youthful zeal tempered by primal dread. 24 hours. May the Emperor protect you, Inquisitor. He did not protect this place, she thought, but said nothing. The whisper descended into the hangar bay, a mote of light swallowed by a giant's throat. The space was vast enough to hold a dozen battle barges, but it was empty, derelict, and utterly silent. The air, recycled for 10,000 years, was thin, cold, and tasted of ozone and rust. Her landing lights swept over the deck, revealing not the orderly rows of a Legion port, but a chaotic jumble of objects, stacked crates marked with faded Legion sigils, Rows of drop pods sealed shut, silent fighters shrouded in dust webs, and statues. Not statues, dreadnoughts, scores of them. Standing in silent, unmoving ranks, their hulls scarred and ancient, their power cores dark. The Contemptor pattern, the Castroferum, even older, more archaic forms she couldn't name. An entire company of interred heroes placed here forever on the eve of deployment, a ghost army. Lysis stepped from the lander, her bootsteps echoing in the monumental silence. The air prickled with stale psychic resonance, the echoes of superhuman minds long dormant or gone mad in the dark. The oculus in her arm was no longer cold. It burned with a fierce, sympathetic pain. This was not just a hiding place. It was a mausoleum. A grinding sound echoed through the hangar, the sound of stone on metal. From the shadows between two colossal dreadnoughts, a figure emerged. It was not a space marine. It was Servitor, but of a design that made the custodian on Zeramund look crude. It was crafted in the image of a Legion serf, its face a gentle, compassionate human mask now cracked and dusty. Its body, a masterwork of silent hydraulics and plasteel. In its hands, it carried a simple data slate of a design 10,000 years old. It stopped before her and offered the slate. Its voice, when it spoke, was a soft, sad whisper, the exact opposite of Zeramund's scream. "Welcome, Seeker of the Question. You bear the key of lament. You have walked the penitent fields. You are expected." Lysis took the slate. The screen glowed to life, not with text, but with a recorded image. A face, human, aged, wise, and etched with a grief so deep it had become part of his features. He wore the robes of a Legion iterator, a remembrancer of the Great Crusade. "If you were seeing this," the recording began, the voice thin with age and despair, "then Zeramund still sings, and our father's warning endures. I am Historitor Vale, last keeper of the Star Scorpion's truth. We who remained, the librarians, the dreadnoughts, the wounded, we obeyed our Primarch's final command. We fled, we hid, we preserved the Legion's legacy not for war, but for memory. We are the keepers of the why." The image flickered, showing brief, fragmented records. The Primarch's anguish upon receiving the Oculus, his tearful, furious order to disband and vanish, the first terrible screams as Zeramund was unmade. But a memory without a witness is a sigh in the dark. We have waited for a sign, for the scream to change. Your broadcast, it contained a new note, a silence within the scream. You have done what we could not. You have challenged the dirge. Historitor Vale's eyes, ancient and milky, seemed to stare directly at her. The final command has one last clause. For the one who comes not to silence the truth, but to hear it. We offer not just memory, but the legacy. It is not for you. It is for a time beyond this cycle. Follow the Keeper. See what we saved when we turned our backs on the Great Crusade to save our souls. The recording ended. The Servitor Keeper turned and began to walk, its silent steps leading her deeper into the fortress tomb, past the ranks of dead dreadnoughts, through vaults containing Legion banners, now turned to dust, into the sacred sepulchral heart of the last Star Scorpion's refuge. They arrived at a final door, not of metal, but of pure black stone. Upon it was carved a single complex symbol, the lost sigil of the Second Legion, intertwined with the representation of the Oculus of Cycles. "The Athenaeum of the broken wheel," the Keeper whispered. "Within lies the answer to the question that damned us. The reason our Primarch chose oblivion over glory." The door slid open without a sound. Cold, ancient air, smelling of preserved parchment and static, washed over her. Lysis stepped across the threshold. The chamber was not large. In its center, on a simple stone dais, rested a single object. It was not a weapon, not a book, not a hololith. It was a Geneseed extraction module, and within its translucent nutrient fluid-filled tank, illuminated by a soft internal light, hung a single perfect progenoid gland. It pulsed with a slow, dormant primordial life. It was pure, unmutated, untainted by the flaw that would later be called the curse of the second, or by the sins of the father. It was the genetic legacy of the lost Primarch, preserved at the moment of his greatest despair, a seed of potential snatched from the jaws of absolute annihilation. The Star Scorpions had not just hidden themselves, they had hidden their future. While the Imperium burned and the cycles turned, they had safeguarded the one thing that could begin anew. Not a truth to despair over, but a biological possibility, a chance, however faint, for a different kind of son to be born in a different kind of age. The oculus in Lysis's arm fell silent. The cold faded, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating warmth. She understood now. The Primarch's heresy was not in asking why. It was in answering with what if. And she, an inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus, now stood guard over the most heretical object in the galaxy. Not a record of doom, but a seed of hope. The progenoid gland hung in its amniotic silence. A biological heresy of world-shattering magnitude. To the Imperium, it was a ghost, a genetic memory that should have been excised. To Lysis, standing in the dead quiet of the Athenaeum, it was a cosmological verdict. The Primarch had not just surrendered to despair, he had enacted a final, profound act of sabotage against the Emperor's design. He had preserved a piece of himself outside the cycle, a wild variable the Imperial apparatus could not account for. The Servitor Keeper stood motionless by the door, its compassionate mask observing her. The legacy sleeps. It has slept for 100 centuries, awaiting a bearer who understands its purpose is not to restore what was, but to begin what might be. Lysis approached the dais. The fluid in the module was perfectly clear, the gland within an intricate sculpture of arterial connections and dormant potential. How is it pure? The corruption that led to the expungio. The flaw. There was no flaw in the genocide, the Keeper whispered, its voice, the rustle of ancient pages. Only in the understanding. The flaw was the truth they carried, the knowledge of the oculus. It made them unstable, questioning, reluctant. In the eyes of the Crusade, that was the mutation. This sample was taken from the Primarch before his final journey to Zaramund, before the oculus's truth fully saturated his being. It is the template of what he was, not what he became. It is possibility, unburdened by prophecy. Possibility, the most dangerous word in the galaxy. To report this to Crassus would be to trigger an exterminatus on a scale that would make the purging of a world look merciful. Every living thing on the somber penance, herself included, would be vaporized to keep this secret. The fortress, the dreadnoughts, the seed, all would be scoured from existence. The cycle of discovery and annihilation would complete another turn, this time with her as the agent of the doom. She could not take it. She could not leave it. Her mandate was to investigate and report. But her oath, the deeper oath she had sworn upon first taking the rosette, was to mankind's survival. The oculus had shown her that survival, in the long galactic scale, was impossible along the current path. This was a detour, a secret path, scratched onto the map of fate. The fortress systems, Lysis asked, her eyes never leaving the gently pulsing gland. They responded to Zaramund's scream, but the scream is broken now. How did you hear the new signal? We have always heard it, the Keeper said. It is the background radiation of our exile. Your disruption created a new harmonic, a question within the lament. It was a sound we had never heard, and so we answered. We are the keepers of the question. You have brought a new one. Can you move this fortress from this anchor? The gravitational mooring is permanent. The fortress is the tomb. We are the epitaph, but the legacy can be moved. It was always the intention. We were the vault. You are the key. The weight of the decision settled upon her, heavier than any armor. She had come to uncover a truth, and in doing so, had been made the custodian of its sole, fragile future. She thought of the dreadnoughts in the hangar, ancient heroes who chose eternal vigil over a universe that had rejected them. She thought of the scream of Zaramund, now a broken sigh. She thought of Crassus, waiting for a report that would be a death warrant. There was no path that led back to the Imperium that did not end in fire.
But there was a path forward, into a darkness so profound it might after millennia, be mistaken for a new kind of dawn? I will take it, she said, the words final in the still air. What is required? The keeper moved to the side of the module. A panel slid open, revealing a compact, cylindrical carrying case of blackstone and stasis field generators. With reverent, precise movements, the servitor initiated a transfer sequence. The nutrient fluid drained, the module opened, and the progenoid gland, trailing delicate umbilicals, was settled into the case. A low hum filled the chamber as the stasis field engaged, locking the biological material in a moment outside of time. The case sealed itself with a soft click. The stasis will hold for 10,000 years, or until it is placed within a compatible culture vat, the keeper instructed, handing her the surprisingly light cylinder. It must be taken far from the light of the Astronomicon, to a place where the cycles hold no sway, a place of silence, where a new question can be asked without an old empire answering with fire. Lysis took the case. It felt like holding the still beating heart of a god. And you, the others? We have kept our vigil. The question has been passed. Our purpose is fulfilled. The servitor turned its cracked face towards the door. There is one more who would speak with you, the last captain. It led her not back to the hangar, but to a smaller chamber overlooking Ida command niche. There, encased not in a dreadnought sarcophagus, but in a towering, ornate suit of tactical dreadnought armor codified pattern stood a single space marine. His armor was the color of ashes and dried blood, the star scorpion sigil on his shoulder defaced by a single, diagonal scar. He stood at perfect, silent attention, facing the view of his silent, entombed legion. Power cables and nutrient lines snaked from his armor into the fortress wall, sustaining him in a 10,000-year vigil. As she entered, a bank of Vox speakers crackled to life on his armor. The voice that emerged was deep, a grinding avalanche of sorrow and resolve, stripped of all human timbre by time and loss. Inquisitor, the single word vibrated in the metal of the floor. You carry our father's last hope, our final duty. Last captain, Lysis acknowledged, standing before the giant. Your sacrifice is beyond measure. Sacrifice implies a choice. We had none, only a command. We obeyed. Now, you have a choice. You can't take that seed to your masters and earn a swift death and a moment's praise. Or you can do what our father intended, steal a future from the jaws of a doomed crest. The helmeted head inclined slightly. The keeper as you introduced a flaw into the Song of Zeramin, a deliberate imperfection. Why? Because perfection was the prison, Lysis answered, the truth coming freely now, in this place where truth was the only currency. The scream's certainty was its power. I traded certainty for doubt. A low, grating sound came from the Vox, something that might have been a laugh or a sob. That, the first tool of the free mind. Our father would have liked you. He shifted, a monumental movement of servos and Chiramite. Your ship is watched. Your master expects a report. You cannot return as you are. We will provide a diversion, a final truth for the Imperium to record, so that your lie may live. What diversion? The somber penance will detect a power surge from this fortress. It will see the hangar bay door seal. Then, it will witness the gravitational anchor destabilize. This tomb will collapse into the dead heart of the black hole's shadow, taking every relic, every record, and every last star scorpion with it. A clean, absolute end, the very kind your Inquisition prefers. Lysis understood. A pyre, a final, magnificent light to cover her escape. You will die. We died 10,000 years ago, when our father sent us into the dark. This is simply the closing of the tomb. Your task is harder, Inquisitor. You must live. You must carry that seed into a deeper dark, and you must find soil for it where the light of Terra does not burn. Go. Your lander has been refueled. A course is plotted to a blind jump point, away from our collapse. There was no time for ceremony, for gratitude. It would have been an insult to these ancient, weary guardians. Lysis clutched the blackstone cylinder and gave the last captain a nod. The highest respect one predator could offer another. Tell no one of us. The grinding voice said, "A final request. Let the Imperium believe we were a flaw. Excised. Let the galaxy forget the star scorpions. But you, remember the question." She turned to Ren, the keeper, guiding her back to the whisper. As she boarded, the first tremors shook the fortress. The hangar lights flared, then died, replaced by the strobing crimson of emergency lumens.
The great doors began to grind shut. Through the closing gap, she saw the ranks of dreadnoughts. And then, one by one, across the hangar, 10,000-year-old power cores began to ignite, not in war, but in salute, a final, silent symphony of light in the eternal dark. The whisper shot from the closing maw as the fortress behind her began to tear itself apart, a dying star swallowing its own history. On the bridge of the somber penance, they would be recording it all. The catastrophic power spike, the gravitational collapse, the total, beautiful, final destruction. The perfect end to Crassus's investigation. Alone in the cockpit, Lysis set the coordinates for the blind jump, the Blackstone case secured beside her. She was no longer an inquisitor returning from a mission. She was a fugitive, a gardener of forbidden futures, carrying a ghost in a box. Behind her, the last light of the star scorpions winked out forever. Ahead, there was only the silent, starless void and the faint, impossible whisper of a question not yet asked. The whisper tore through the silent deep, a mote fleeing the detonation of a tomb. Behind it, the sable maw convulsed as the gravitational anchor collapsed, the fortress of the star scorpions, and all its ghosts vanishing into a singularity of its own making. On the bridge of the somber penance, the event would be recorded as a catastrophic, purifying end, a psychic anomaly and its associated heresy finally, utterly scrubbed from reality. For Inquisitor Varric, it would be a testament to duty and a tragic, heroic end for his superior. For Lord Crassus, it would be a closed file, albeit one with a faint, lingering scent of unresolved variables. Lysis did not look back. The coordinates fed into the Whisper's navigation cogitator led to no star, no nebula, no known celestial marker. It was a point in the intergalactic gulf, a place so empty that not even the Astronomican's dimmest echo could reach. A perfect place to be lost, a perfect place to hide a seed. The jump was short, brutal. The Geller field of the small lander strained, reality itself groaning in protest at this leap into nothing. When the Whisper shuddered back into real space, the view was one to crush a lesser soul. Utter, absolute blackness. No stars, no nebulae, no distant galaxies, only the faint, thermal haze of the universe's background radiation, a ghost of creation's first fire. Here, there was no up or down, no time but the ticking of the lander's chronometer. Here, the scream of Zaramund was not just silent, it was unimaginable. She powered down everything but the bare essentials. Life support, stasis field for the cylinder, and a single low-power distress beacon set to a frequency that nothing in the Imperium would ever scan for. It was not a call for rescue. It was a marker. A whisper saying, "I was here, and I chose this." Then she waited. The silence was different from the somber penances. That had been a curated quiet, a library's hush. This was the silence at the bottom of a well dug through the corpse of space. It pressed in, a physical void. In it, the memories she had walled up broke free, not as nightmares, but as cold, clear facts. She saw the Oculus's cycles, the empires rising on order and falling to the chaos they birthed. She saw the Emperor's grand, tragic design, a desperate gambit to break a wheel by becoming its most powerful spoke. She saw the Primarch's face, not as a traitor or a hero, but as a son who loved his father and his own sons too much to lead them into the grinding gears of fate. His rebellion was not of sword and bolter, but of preservation. He had chosen to become a secret so that something of his line might survive the inevitable crash. And now she held that secret, a progenoid gland, a biological blueprint for a being that could have been a Primarch, or perhaps something else entirely, a being whose very existence was a question posed to destiny. What grew from it would not be a star scorpion. It would be something new, born in silence, raised in the dark between galaxies, free of the Imperium's dogmas and the chaos god's hungers. It would be the ultimate variable. Days passed, measured only by the slow drain of power cells. She meditated, not on the Imperial creed, but on the pattern of the cycles. The Oculus had shown her the disease. The Primarch had given her the potential cure. Her own role, she understood now, was that of the vector, not to heal the patient, but to carry the attenuated strain of immunity to a place where it could, someday, be studied. A chime echoed in the tomb-like cabin. The long-range auger, set to passive scan, had detected something. Not a ship, a distortion, a delicate spiderweb fracture in space-time, light years away but visible in the absolute void. A natural wormhole, unstable and microscopic by cosmic standards, but a pathway nonetheless. A back door out of the galaxy, the Keeper's final gift, not a destination, but a door. A place where the seed could be taken far from the light of the Astronomicon. It was not an escape, it was a condemnation to a deeper exile. There was no guarantee the wormhole led to a survivable place. It might lead to another dead universe, or crush the Whisper to subatomic paste. But it was a path the cycles could not predict, because it lay outside their wheel. The decision was already made. She had made it the moment she took the cylinder. Lysis powered the lander's engines to their last straining reserves and aimed the needle nose of the Whisper at the faint, gravitational whisper of the wormhole. As the tiny craft accelerated into the endless dark, she opened a final log entry. Not for Crassus, not for the Imperium, for the seed, for whoever might find it, or for the void itself to remember. This is Inquisitor Lysis, Ordo Malleus. My designation is now void. I bear the legacy of the second. The question has been preserved. The wheel turns, but a splinter has been kicked from its spokes. We sought to silence a scream with a louder truth, and then with a sigh. All we did was change the note. The only way to break a song is to step out of the choir. I am stepping out. The seed goes to a place beyond the song. There is no hope in this act, only a different kind of certainty. The certainty that we tried something else. End log. She erased the beacon. The Whisper became a phantom, leaving no trace. The wormhole grew from a distortion to a maelstrom of twisted light and impossible geometries. The lander's hull screamed in protest. Alarms blared, then died as systems failed. The stasis field around the Blackstone cylinder glowed with desperate power. Lysis strapped herself into the command throne, her eyes fixed on the chaos ahead, not with fear, but with a grim, final satisfaction. The Emperor had the Imperium. The Primarch had his lament. She had the silence and what it carried. The Whisper crossed the threshold. Reality untied itself for a moment that was both an instant and an eternity. Lysis saw not the cycles of a galaxy, but the tapestry of many, a billion wheels turning in a vast, dark machine. And then she saw a gap in the weave, a place where the thread was loose. The lander, the woman, and the seed passed through. On the other side, there was no triumphant emergence into a new light. There was a violent expulsion into a different kind of dark, a nebula of primordial gas, lit by the slow, cold fusion of first stars. A nursery, not for empires, but for possibilities. The Whisper was dead, a husk. The stasis field flickered, died. But the Blackstone cylinder, cracked and scarred, tumbled into the gravitational embrace of a small, rocky planetoid drifting in the nebula's heart. It impacted. It buried itself in alien regolith. And there, in the absolute cold and quiet, bathed in the light of infant suns that had never known life, the progenoid gland slept. Not waiting for an empire, not waiting for a crusade, waiting for time itself to forget what it was, so that it could become something new. In the Imperium, the file on Inquisitor Lysis and the Zeramund anomaly was sealed, stamped, resolved. The sigh faded from astropathic choirs. The story became a minor footnote in the endless annals of tragedy and purge. The wheel turned, but in the silence between galaxies, in a nebula untouched by prayers or screams, a single, silent note had been introduced into the cosmic melody. It was not a scream. It was not a sigh. It was a rest, a pause. And in that pause, buried in forgotten stone, slept a question that had yet to be asked.